You know, I want to introduce Tony Ballard. And I want to tell you, it is such a pleasure to know him. I know him for quite a bit of years. And every time I talk to him, I learn something new, honestly. And I also have this pleasure to share the responsibility of bookstore together, and he's a wonderful person to work with. And I was very pleased when I asked him to give a talk tonight for Meeting of the Mind. He accepted, and when he accepted, it was like something unusual, happened when he said yes. The topic that he's talking tonight is about the art of listening. The art of listening.
Oh, that's just wrong.
Well, and but then, I received an email from him. He said, the art of spiritual listening. But then later on, it progressed to next subject, almost in the same line. So his background is teaching in university and college, like St. Petersburg College, which a lot of students over there benefit his knowledge. So before I, go on and on and on, I really want to welcome him to.
Oh, stop it. Thank you, Cambyse. Hello, everyone. How are you? I feel like I have no business here, but here I am. Because I'm always out there, that's why. I have to apologize, Cambyse. Cambyse has been contacting me, telling me, what is your topic, what is your topic, what is your topic? And I have been emailing him to the wrong email address. Kept coming back. And finally, he called me because he wanted to know what my topic is. And I said, I've sent you all these emails. And when I told him the address, he said, no, that's not the one I told you. And he was right. That's not the one he told me. And during all of that time, yes, my topic has changed about 5 to 6 to 7 to 8 times. But it is all about listening. As he said, I teach at St. Petersburg College. And I got to tell you, after hearing, attending so many Meeting of the Minds and hearing the different speakers and hearing Hardy and Gilbert and Dr. Hatcher, and they're always speaking on some really heavy stuff. And I don't have anything really heavy to talk about. I think I'm pretty simple. And most of the things I talk about are pretty simple, but I don't think that means that it's not worth hearing. I think a lot of times some things are, at least on the surface, so simple that we fail to see the importance, or at least we forget the importance of it. So tonight, yes, we are going to be talking about listening, okay? And I think of listening as obviously something that we have to do on a daily basis, but I also think of listening, there are different kinds of listening, and we'll get into that. And one of those types of listening that I think is very much overlooked, which admittedly, even in many of the books that I've read, I would like to say I have written more, but I've written no book. I've read a lot of them. One of my favorites is, no, I was going to say Dr. Seuss, but that's not the right place. This is not the right place. But one of those things that seems to be left out from many books where they're talking about listening is something that I think of as spiritual listening. You might call it listening with the heart. And that is really something that is very difficult to do. I think of many of the messages that many of the messengers of God, when they are trying to attract people to this message that they bring us, you've heard many of them. Everyone has heard somewhere or other probably, be still and know that I am God. To me, the translation of that, my translation of that simple translation is shut up and listen. I'm God. But how often do we do that? There are allusions in the Bible to that still small voice, which often is seen as being the voice of God that we often fail to hear. I've got a few verses here from the Baha'i writings that I'll just share with you very quickly. Well is it with the man of discernment, who hath recognized and perceived the truth, and the one possessed of a hearing ear, who hath hearkened unto his sweet voice. That hearing ear. Here's something from Abdu'l-Baha. That was from Baha'u'llah. Here's something from Abdu'l-Baha. Another new principle revealed by His Holiness Baha'u'llah is the injunction to investigate truth. That is to say, no man should blindly follow his ancestors and forefathers. Nay, each must see with his own eyes, hear with his own ears, and investigate the truth himself, in order that we may follow the truth instead of blind acquiescence and imitation of ancestral beliefs. One final one. God has given man the eye of investigation by which he may see and recognize truth. He has endowed man with ears that he may hear the message of reality, and conferred upon him the gift of reason by which he may discover things for himself. This is his endowment and equipment for the investigation of reality. Man is not intended to see through the eyes of another, hear through another's ears, nor comprehend with another's brain. Each human creature has individual endowment, power, and responsibility in the creative plan of God. Now, when I read these and think about them, excuse me one moment here, just want to kind of get rid of something here. When I read these and think about them, I can't help but think about the importance of listening. Often we'll hear or read where it says hear, hear, hear. And when you think about it, we have to know that hearing and listening are not the same thing. And yet the words are often used interchangeably. Often when, and again, I'm no expert, but in my opinion, often when we read hear, it doesn't simply mean hear, it means listen to. Now, the difference between hearing and listening is important. And I dare say everyone in here knows what the differences are, and yet I'd like to point them out. Hearing, of course, is simply what your ears do. As long as your ears are working okay, you're hearing. Listening, however, is a choice that we make. Listening requires thought. It requires actually mulling over the messages that we are receiving and reaching some conclusions about them. Now, I'd like to make a little disclaimer here. While I do teach listening, I teach communication, and in that, we always have to cover listening. Well, even though I do teach that on a regular basis, I always like to make this little disclaimer that knowing a concept from an academic standpoint isn't necessarily proof that one is an expert at putting that concept into action. I'm sure my wife can talk to you about that. Kind of tough being, calling yourself a communications expert, because whenever there's a disagreement, sooner or later, it's going to come back to you. Well, you're the communications expert. You need to be, you should be able to understand. You should know how to listen to what I'm saying. We can be speaking the same language and going through the motions of listening without really doing so. Now, as I said, I teach communication, but what is communication? Well, in a very simple definition, we could say that communication is the process of effectively sharing meaning. The process of effectively sharing meaning. Now, think about how many times we've all, at one time or another, been engaged in communication, or thought we were, and in the end, we found out we did not effectively share meaning. One person went away with one point of view, or actually attaching one meaning to the message, and we went away attaching another meaning to a message. Some years ago, I had a colleague that we were serving on the same committee, and we were working on a project together. Now, I work right here on the Clearwater campus of St. Petersburg College. She works in Tarpon Springs at the Tarpon campus of St. Petersburg College. We had decided that we were going to get together for lunch one day to work, to kind of get together on this project, and that way when we had our next meeting, we'd have our thing together. And we decided we were going to meet at this restaurant called Hops. Okay? We decided the time, we decided the day, we decided the place. And on that day, I went to Hops, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited, and she did not show up. And I finally just ordered my food. I was ticked off, I got to tell you. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not Mr. Punctuality myself. People that know me know this. But, you know, when you've been waiting for 45 minutes, nearly an hour, it's time to eat. So I went ahead and I ate and I left. And about a week later, it was time for us to have our meeting. And I did not call her in the interim. Rather, you know, I got to admit, I felt like I had been dissed. I had been, you know, she had disrespected me. The least she could do, she stood me up. The least she could do is call me and apologize, which she did not do. So the day of the meeting comes. And we meet in this large conference room, big wooden table, and I go in and I see her there. She's sitting on the end we had assigned seats, and I sat down. I wouldn't dare approach her. She owes me an apology. Why would I approach her? I was a little full of myself. We go all the way through the meeting. We threw something together there on the spot. It didn't go over well, but the meeting is finally over. And I hung around for a while people are kind of mingling after the meeting, and I figured sooner or later she's going to come over and she's going to say something. Sorry I couldn't make the meeting that day. It didn't happen. And so I finally said, I can't take it anymore. So I walked across the room to her. And the first thing out of my mouth was, where were you? And she said, where was I? Where were you? And I said, what are you talking about? She says, I was there. I waited, and you didn't show up. I said, no, ho, wait a minute. I waited, and you didn't show up. Well, we talked and talked and talked and talked and talked, trying to prove that we each were right. I'm trying to prove I'm right. She's trying to prove she's right. Quite frankly, I'm trying to prove that she's really not being honest with me. Well, what came out that I did not know was, at that time, there were 2 Hops restaurants. One near the Tarpon Springs campus, and one down here. It has since closed, but down here, very near the Clearwater campus. Now, we said the time, we said the day, we said the place, but there wasn't enough information there for us to really share meaning effectively. What was the test? We would have shown up at the same place, but we didn't. Now, we spoke the same language, and yet we failed to share meaning. Now, I just use that as an example to see, you know, there are so many elements involved, so many things that can get in the way of effective communication, that one thing we definitely want to do as much as possible is not make listening a part of the problem, and yet so often it is. We often talk about effectively expressing ourselves, but we don't really talk enough about effective listening. Okay, so let's start out by talking about what is listening. Well, quite simply, listening, again, is a voluntary process. We voluntarily take part in the listening process. But there are different steps in the process of listening. First, we have to perceive. Perceiving meaning to sense, if you will. We perceive a message. We interpret the message. That means we give it a meaning. We decide what it means to us, and that's part of our perception. I've received this message from you. I'm going to decide what it means to me. Then we evaluate the message. Do I like it? Does it really mean anything to me? Is it important to me? Is it not important? Do I even understand it? So we evaluate the message. But 2 important parts of listening that a lot of people forget about. Number 1 is remembering the message. I got a real problem with that. Remembering the message that someone else gave you. And then finally, responding in a way that shows the other person, the other communicator, that yes, I understand your message. Because your response is an indication of whether or not you really got the message or not. Okay. Now, that's all voluntary. We can decide to listen, we can decide not to listen. The thing is, sometimes we decide to appear to listen when we don't actually listen. Now, there are different kinds of listening. There's what we call informative listening, which is really just kind of a neutral listening. Some of you are probably doing, in fact, you're probably all doing that right now, just to get the information, informative listening. But then there's critical listening. Critical listening is sometimes referred to as evaluative listening. We're trying to decide, is this person being honest with me? Is this an honest message or not? There's also appreciative listening. That's listening mainly for entertainment. And then there's what we call empathic listening. And empathic listening is actually listening for the purpose of forming and maintaining bonds. Let's call it relationship listening. It's often also referred to, at least we can say that it's also for the purpose of solving problems. Empathy is that quality that good communicators have where they actually try and truly relate to what someone else has been through. You know, really try and understand where you're coming from. That's empathy, and this is called empathic listening. Now, those are the four kinds of listening that I usually read about: informative, critical, appreciative, and empathic. But then there's that thing that I call spiritual listening. And to me, spiritual listening involves all of those, where we really are trying to get information. We're trying to evaluate, is this information coming from a credible source? In this case, I'd say the source would be God. Is it actually something that I need to grab a hold of and try and relate to other people with? Okay. That's what I call spiritual listening. It's hard to do spiritual listening if you are not willing to work at real listening. But what is real listening? Any number of times we've had our discussions and so forth, and we often talk about the search for truth. Well, to me, real listening is the search for truth, or at least part of the search for truth. I mean, you think about it. I think of our ears as the tool that we depend on when our eyes aren't quite doing the job. I mean, you think about eyes, you can see way, 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 way far, far away because light can travel so fast and so forth. Ears depend on sound, and of course, sound doesn't travel as quickly as sight nor generally as far, if it's traveling by air anyway. But when it comes to the actual investigation of reality, shall we say, we depend on both. I think the closer and closer someone comes, you don't stop depending on your eyes when sight is the necessary sense, but you also continue to depend on your ears to hear the words that they're saying, the messages that they're sending you. Now, it's interesting that if we were to be able to understand Chinese characters, the Chinese character that represents listening actually combines the symbol of an eye with the symbol of an ear. We need both. Okay, we need both. But whatever the case may be, we still need to be able to truly hear and process the message. And this is real listening. Real listening is observation. It is investigation. It is evaluation. And it is connection. All for the purpose of finding real truth. And yet, it's not really that easy to do. A lot of times we think we're listening, but we're really not. Real listening is really very difficult. It really is. And when we decide we're really going to listen, it really requires a certain amount of trust. A certain amount of trust. Listening is hard work. One of the reasons that listening is hard work, I can't speak about other languages, but the average speaker of English speaks at a rate of about 140 to 160 words per minute. That's average. The average speed at which we can listen is between 600 and 800 words per minute. Now you compare that difference, that's a huge difference. What are we doing with all that downtime? We got a lot of downtime there. What are we doing? Anybody got any ideas what we're doing? Well, a lot of different things. Gilbert, you would be processing. Gilbert's a processor. Unfortunately, so many of us, we get distracted by other things. We daydream. We often will start determining what our answer is going to be to the other communicator before they've even finished sharing their message with us. We've decided this is what I'm going to say to that. You know. And that means that during that time, we're not listening. Again, it's hard work, and that's one of the reasons. But another reason that listening is hard work is because of what we call message overload. we just have so many messages coming at us from everywhere. You got the TV, you got the radio, you got billboards, you got all those other signs out there, you got the people in your lives that are talking to you, and then you got all those messages inside your head that you can't block out. There's just so much coming at you. And to say, I'm going to now be still, quiet all that down, and focus on this message from this person, that again takes hard work. Again, you've got the media, career, the family, there's just so much information. But there are other reasons that listening is difficult. One of the reasons is in our own head. Sometimes if we don't see the benefit in the message, we stop listening. But the question is, how can you see the benefit if you don't listen? How can you see the benefit? So if there are no apparent benefits, we just kind of often will go into the pretending, to listen. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Another reason we stop listening is something that we just call plain old noise. Now there's external noise. That's the environmental stuff. You hear the cars and everything zooming by, and sometimes that can be a distraction. If people are up walking around, please don't misunderstand. When we say noise, we're not just talking about sound. With external noise, we're talking about anything in your environment that is a distraction. It may be sound, it may be visual, it may be the uncomfortable chair that you're sitting in, or whatever the case may be. Not to say those chairs are uncomfortable. Actually, I love those chairs. I think they're very nice. But we might not see that, wow, I'm keying into a lot of other things instead of really focusing on a message. But external noise is not the worst kind of noise. More distracting is what we call internal noise. And that is that stuff that's inside your head. Okay, when we're talking about internal noise, what we're talking about is the fact that your thoughts and your priorities may be a little different from what is being shared with you by others. And they actually can act as filters that negatively impact on the messages that others are sending you. In other words, we don't just process in a neutral way what we hear. We often will slant it one way or another based on our own experiences, based on our own perceptions. There are different types of internal noise. One of those things is preconceived notions, things that we already believe to be true. We don't question, we don't weigh, we don't evaluate, we just say, hey, this is the truth for me. I often talk about a good friend of mine who happens to be an atheist. We've been friends for, 26 years now. In 26 years, we have constantly had this very good-natured discussion about the existence or the non-existence of God. And I have shared with her what I felt was absolute incontrovertible truth, that God does exist. I have told her, look at the order of the earth. She comes back with, look at the disorder. I say, how, can you make a flower? No, but I don't need to. One time I actually thought I had her. I said, okay, do you at least believe, and I'll admit I got this from the Baha'i writings. Do you at least believe that for every creation, there must be a creator? She thought about it. She's very, very logical, very practical. She says, well, of course, for every creation, there must be a creator. I said, okay, that's good. We can agree on that. I said, who created you? She said, that's easy, my parents. Okay. Well, who created them? Their parents. Well, who created them? Their parents. I said, if you keep going back far enough, you're going to find that there had to be at least that first coupling, that first some kind of beings that led to who you are today. She said, well, that's easy. Those beings just crawled out of the primordial ooze. I couldn't refute it. I don't know. I said, fine. Crawled out of the primordial ooze. Here's my next question. Who put them in that ooze? Whatever or whoever put them in that ooze, I believe is an all-knowing, all-seeing, all-present intelligence, and I believe that that is God. And she said, fine. Tell me something. Who created God? Well, God wasn't created. God was just always there. I cannot prove, and don't get me wrong, I don't mean that no one can prove, but I personally cannot prove the existence of God, and yet I believe that God exists. That's one of my preconceived notions. I look at it as spiritual intelligence. I don't need incontrovertible, concrete proof. To me, it's all around me. It's within me. I can look in the mirror, and maybe that sounds just a little bit egotistical, but I think we should all be able to look in the mirror and say, yes, God exists because I exist. Doesn't mean that I am it, him, or her, but my existence shows the existence of God. But she has decided for herself God does not exist, period. To me, that's noise in her head. Now, something might be able to quiet that noise. I haven't succeeded in 26 years. So those preconceived notions. Now, you think about what some people may be thinking when you are talking to them about maybe something very heavy. Maybe it's religion, maybe it's politics. Anything that there's room for disagreement. Think about some of the things that may form the basis of their position. And all of these, frankly, are noise. If it's anything other than neutral, open-minded, analytical listening, it is noise. Here's one of those things that kind of slants or steers our listening behavior. I already know what you're going to say. I saw you coming. So I grabbed up my bag of baggage and I held it tight. And that is the basis of my response to you. I already know what you're going to say. Now, I'm not going to say that's never the case. Sometimes we do already know what someone is going to say. If the Kirby man comes to your door and he's got a vacuum cleaner in his hand, you kind of got a good idea. Although I got a little story about where, well, I was once an owner of a Kirby. Actually, we have one now, but I'll tell that some other time. Another response that people may have is, you want to change me. How dare you want to change me? Because our ego is very much wrapped up in that. You want to change me. That means you don't think I'm good enough as I am. Or you think I'm wrong. And how could that be? How could I possibly be wrong? I have thought this way for years and years and years. And now you have the nerve to tell me I'm wrong? How dare you? Another bit of baggage that slants people's listening behavior is basically selfish listening. My needs and priorities outweigh yours. So no matter what you're saying to me, the main thing I'm interested in is reaching my own goal, no matter how wrong or self-serving or maybe off the right path that goal may be. My needs and priorities outweigh yours. Another common way of thinking that slants listening behavior is, I always know what's right for me. I'm an adult. I've been around for quite some time. I always know what's right for me. And now you're going to come to me and tell me about something I've never even heard of, or someone I've never even heard of. Again, how dare you? I always know what's right for me. And then there are those that kind of just throw caution to the wind. They think, I like what I think, and I don't care if I'm wrong. I'm just going to hang on to it. I don't care. Oh, you've got factual information, you've got evidence. Great, keep it. I'm not really interested in that. I like what I think, and I don't care if I'm wrong. And then there's another, because of who you are, nothing you say could have any real value. Because of who you are. I got to be honest with you, I have a million other thoughts going through my mind right now, examples that I would like to use, but I don't. Many are religious in nature, spiritual in nature. But how many times has anyone wanted to have, I'm sure all of you have probably entered into what you felt was an open-minded, or attempted to enter into an open-minded, spiritually based discussion on spiritual issues, religion, whatever. And the bottom line, when you finally get to it, maybe the person may tell you this outright, you might never find it out, but very often what some people are thinking are, wait a minute, what denomination are you? What religion are you? What sect are you? What? Never heard of that. Or even if I have, it's different from what I already have stamped on myself. So because of who you are, nothing you say could have any real value. Yes. Oh, you're just saying that. I was wondering. Another thing that actually affects our listening behavior is what we call judging with obsolete information. Judging with obsolete information. First of all, holy book after holy book tells us don't judge, don't judge, don't judge, don't judge. Doesn't always stop us from doing it. Then couple that problem with the fact that many of us are judging others or judging messages with obsolete information. That means that we are looking at current reality with information that is based on our own past experiences. And it has hurt us, or it has made us turn this way and that way and this way and that way. And we have a real difficulty putting that aside. What we will do is we will take that information based on those experiences and we will illogically apply that information to current reality, even though it doesn't really work for now. Does anyone out there understand what I'm talking about? I hope so. Because it's easy to do. It's easy to look at a situation we find ourselves in, and it resembles a past experience. Or maybe it's on the other end of the scale. Maybe it doesn't look like a past experience at all. But we still will depend on a past experience to hear the message that's being shared. Okay. You know 2 + 2 = 4. And then someone comes along and they're speaking algebraic equations to you. And it makes no sense. And even though it's right, you want to hang on to 2 + 2 = 4. And it doesn't mean that 2 + 2 never equals 4. It doesn't mean it won't continue to. But it doesn't mean also that the message that is unfamiliar to you is wrong. And yet very often our listening will tell us these things. Judging with obsolete information comes from hanging on to past pain. It causes fear, anger, mistrust. Often we are hanging on to past successes that we can't let go. It felt so good. Let's just hang on to that, you know. Because of our past successes, very often we will apply a solution to a particular problem even when that solution no longer works. It worked then, but it doesn't work now. Sometimes we'll be hearing messages and cognitive dissonance sets in. That's a fancy word. I figured, hey, I got a master's degree. I got to show you. What is cognitive dissonance? That is when what we hear doesn't stack up with what we already believe. So we dismiss that new knowledge as false without investigation. We don't say, wait a minute, this is unfamiliar to me. Let me take a closer look. What we often will say is, this is unfamiliar to me and it doesn't stack up with what I already know. So I'm not interested. It makes me feel uncomfortable. It makes me feel that maybe I was wrong. But to feel that way also means I'm not interested in learning more. I want to hang on to the past things that have made me who I am, even if who I am is not serving current reality. So those are a lot of the things that get in the way of effective listening. Now, if we're going to be good listeners, there are some things that we could apply, some things we could think about. One of the first things that good listeners do is they intend to listen, to really listen. As we said earlier, many claim they want to listen, but they fail to do so. Good listeners intend to listen. And in order to do that, they suspend their prejudices. They suspend their preconceived notions. They think those things they already thought were true. They just put them aside. I often tell my students, you know, we all got this luggage, this bag of our past prejudices or current prejudices and preconceived notions. We just carry it around with us. It's an invisible bag. When you want to, you can put that down. You can actually put that down and you can listen. But you have to want to put it down. Some people say, no, I like my bag. I'm going to hang on to this bag. Put it down and you can listen more. Good listeners also listen with an open mind. And that means, again, they put down the bag. They open up their mind. Good listeners also really want the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, because that is how we move forward. We may have to do some adjusting, but at least we are on the road to truth. I don't know what all that stuff was before, but now that I know the truth, how could I possibly prefer to stay on a path other than that? And unfortunately, there are those many people who say, hey, no, the road to truth is a little too rocky. I'm real comfortable here. I want to stay here. It takes a hunger for truth. Another element or characteristic of good listeners is good listeners have an understanding that their own perception of truth is not complete, is simply their own, and their own perception of truth is not infallible. We have a book in the bookstore, I believe we still have some copies on it, by Dr. Motlaw, called Come, Let Us Reason Together, Saith the Lord. And one of the things in that book that jumped out at me when I first read it was, you have to understand that this book is a response to a letter that was written by someone who disagreed with his views. And what Dr. Motlaw pointed out was that, first of all, in order to enter into this kind of a discussion, you have to accept the fact that your view might be fallible. It might possibly be wrong. You got to be really full of yourself to assume that you are infallible. Good listeners accept the fact that they may be, that, their view is not infallible. We could have some problems here. Let's investigate. Good listeners are interested in hearing the perceptions and observations of others. They really want to hear what other people think, because they understand that if what they already believe, what they already think they know is true, then they can actually listen to other people and it will still be true afterwards, after they've finished hearing them. Good listeners don't get so taken up on personality and charisma that they fail to listen to the message. Now let's face it, we all love good speakers, we all love good conversationalists, but you have some people that are so good that they can actually put one over on you because of their charisma. Again, we like personality, we like charisma, we like dynamism, but sometimes dynamism can veil your eyes. Sometimes you can get so mesmerized by the speaker that you stop really even caring what they're saying. They just sound so good. Okay. Good listeners set aside any hidden agenda so that they can simply listen for truth. They get rid of that hidden agenda that sometimes we all carry, a little hidden agenda. And a good listener practices what we call perception checking. That means this is what, I'm going to check my own perception here. My perception of things is this. I'm going to stop, put it aside, consider other possibilities. And then in the end, once I have truly considered other possibilities, if I was right at first, I'll still be right. But how will I know if I don't investigate other possibilities? Now, poor listeners share some common habits very often. I'm going to just name a few. One common habit of a poor listener is pseudo-listening. That's pretending to listen. And some of us are real good at it. I'll admit, from time to time, I've been a little guilty of pseudo-listening. We actually look like we're making eye contact when we're pseudo-listening. We can be face-to-face with the person, making eye contact, nodding our heads. We'll even throw in a few uh-huhs. Yeah, I'm with you. We have no idea what they're talking about. No idea. Pseudo-listeners. And I'll admit, I'm terrible about that, I am. Sometimes we're just so busy. And then you have selective listeners. Selective listeners are selective listeners are if they're at a buffet and you have a choice. You can have the whole buffet, which you might call truth. And I'm talking about just listening. I'm not talking about accepting it as truth, but let's say this is all the information. But what selective listeners will do is they'll pick and choose what they want from the message, and then they'll reshape it to make it what they would prefer that it be. And it might not be far from the truth, or it may be very far from the truth. Okay? Then you have defensive listeners. I'm trying to fly through this. I know I've been going on for a while now. Defensive listeners hear neutral remarks as personal attacks. maybe you are talking about your faith, and your faith is different from theirs, and you are simply trying to share the basics of your faith. What a defensive listener will hear is, you're telling me I'm wrong. You're telling me I'm wrong. Rather than saying, I'm just going to get what you have and then I'll make my own decision. No, you're telling me I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, that means you're right. But I can't be wrong. How can you be right? Okay. You have attacked me. You've attacked me. That's defensive listening. Instead of just saying, okay, let me hear your point of view. And I want to emphasize with defensive listeners, what you've shared with them is truly neutral. Because truth is neutral. It's nothing but truth. And then you have ambushing. That's one of my favorites. You probably have a few good ambushers here. You have them everywhere. What is an ambushing listener? This is a person who will go through the motions of listening. They will actually ask you questions. But they are not asking you questions to get information. They are asking you questions to get ammunition. Why are they getting this ammunition? So they can use it against you. So they may go through the motions of being interested. Let's just hear everything you have to say, and then they'll put it back in your face, and you just as well get ready to defend yourself, but you could walk away. Either that, or you just have to face the fact that, hey, I've got to defend myself against this. But they're not truly listening. They have a very slanted listening. They've already decided there is something wrong with what you're saying. I'm going to pick out what's wrong and throw it back in your face. I'm not going to truly investigate. I'm just going to pick out what I think is wrong. Okay? And then we have those people that are actually stage hoggers. These are the people that say, my way of thinking, my beliefs, my thoughts, my interests are the only thing that really has any value here. They're the me people. I don't really need to hear you, but you do need to hear me. Now, I hope I'm not stepping on too many toes, because I got to tell you, I'm stepping on my own toes here. I have said earlier, I'm not the best listener. I know it from an academic standpoint, and it's hard work, and sometimes I'm a very lazy listener. In the context of this topic, I started thinking about my own experience actually with the Baha'i faith. And I remember a lot of people have already heard me talk about what brought me into the Baha'i faith. I do remember that back in 1978, I was in South Carolina, and later on I found out that that was a time that a lot of teenage pioneers were going around teaching the message. And I was in graduate school at the time, and these three Baha'is came to my door. They looked like hippies. They had a guitar, and they had a fireside, what is called a fireside. They had it right at my house. I had a roommate, and we sat around the fire. They had a real fire, a fireside with a real fire, and they sang songs, and in the end, they asked us if we were interested in knowing more about Baha'u'llah. Well, I got to tell you, I stopped listening probably about 15 seconds in. Because you have to understand, coming from a Christian background, one thing I said is, if it ain't Jesus, I ain't interested. Baha'u'llah, who? What? No, not interested. And I stopped listening. I simply stopped listening. What I was guilty of is anticipating an unfamiliar message, and I wasn't willing to open up to new possibilities. I was doing a very egocentric form of listening. Luckily for me, I ended up teaching speech at St. Petersburg College, and I had a student. I've often spoke of her. Her name, she used to live in our community. Her name is Fariba. She now lives in Atlanta. And I had to listen to her speech because it was in a speech, and I was the teacher, and I had to grade this speech. Once I heard that, oh man, Baha'u'llah again. But I had to listen. I had to listen. I got to tell you, I became very defensive. Even though I was trying to remain neutral, I became defensive because I wanted to protect my own beliefs. You know, I became very defensive. Didn't fit comfortably with my current beliefs, my current values. Didn't even fit with my current expectations. And there was a lot of cognitive dissonance going on, that noise where what I'm hearing doesn't jibe with what I really believe. And I didn't want to suspend my own preconceived notions. I didn't want to get out of that I'm right and you're wrong mentality. And she mentioned sources. Now, being the speech teacher, I had to know where these sources came from. I had never heard of these sources. You know, gleanings, Katabi Iqan, Katabi Aqdas, what is all that about? I told her I need to see some of your sources, the hidden words. Ooh. I need to see some of your sources. And she brought them by my office. And I went through a series of poor listening techniques. One was what I call insulated listening. Didn't mention that earlier. Many of you have styrofoam cups. That's a form of insulation. What does insulation do? It prevents change. It prevents change. It keeps the cold cold, keeps the hot hot. Makes it difficult to change what is inside that cup. I became guilty of insulated listening. Didn't want to change. Don't really want to listen to this message because it might make me have to change. So I did that for a while. All righty. For a while, I was also involved in a little bit of pseudo-listening when she came by my office and was talking to me, pretending to listen. Now, I truly was listening in this case, but I was like listening to the words, but trying not to listen to the meaning. One of the reasons I felt like this might be a little more than I'm ready for. Then I did some selective listening. I wanted to, because she really was a nice person. As long as I didn't want to admit I was wrong, but I also didn't want to admit she was right. But she was so nice. So I did a little selective listening. Let me find some things that we can agree on here, and I'll think a little better of you. So I started selecting and accepting as true only what I really wanted to hear. Wow, these hidden words, they're pretty cool. They sound really good. I like that. But in selecting what I wanted to hear and rejecting the rest of the message, I really was twisting the meaning from what the true message really was. It was like I was listening with a shopping list of bias. I'll have a little of this, I'll have some of this. No, not that, not that. Don't want that, don't want that. Give me some of this, give me some of that. Bias. And then finally, I decided to become a stage hogger. Oh yeah, we agree on a lot in religion, so let me share what I already believe with you. In sharing what I believe with you, I can share it in a particular way so that I can finally just shut you up. And you'll just listen to me. I'll block your chances to express yourself by putting all the focus on myself and my thoughts. Well, Fariba got to me by really first listening. She just kind of stopped talking. Just let me go on and on and on and on and on and on. She kind of let me empty myself out. And then she started answering questions that I had. She answered pertinent questions. And when I started running out of questions, she asked for more questions. I wanted to make sure I truly understood what she was talking about. She got me to listen by showing me that I was really being heard. And that was a tool for her. She was able to say, okay, this is one of your, let's call it a misgiving, if you will. Well, let's look at this information here and see if that helps quell your doubts, helps quell your misgivings, whatever the case may be. And she truly answered all of my questions. Now, a poor listener would say, I don't care if you're answering my questions, I'm still not going to agree. And I was tempted. But by then I was a bit conflicted. I had to admit, this makes more sense than I even want to admit, but I can't deny the truth. And luckily for me, as a result of that, I really did enter into a process of real investigation. I started reading and reading and reading and reading and reading. More books, would go back to the Bible, went to my minister who didn't agree with me, and guess what? It didn't matter. Because I felt like, wow, what I have here really is truth. There is one of those hidden words where Baha'u'llah talks about justice. And he says, with justice you will hear with your own eyes and not through the eyes of another. You will, hear with your own ears, not through the ears of another. See with your own eyes, not through the eyes of thy neighbor. I'm really messing it up. But that basically is the meaning. You will recognize truth for yourself. So when it comes down to the results, and when it comes down to the results of good listening, spiritual listening, plain and simple, true listening is a part of any search for truth. It really makes us strive to be more open-minded. It's hard work, but it's worth it. It helps us take a look at ourselves, examine our own fears, our own prejudices, our own ill-perceived beliefs. And sometimes, guess what? We'll come away saying, yeah, now that I've looked at it, I now know I'm right. Or whatever the case may be, good listening, true spiritual listening actually leads to growth, leads to the growth of the spirit. and it leads to unwavering confidence. It's really good to have perceptions that you could call beliefs. But what's even better than beliefs is simply knowing. When you are a good listener, you come a lot closer to not simply believing, but really knowing when it comes to truth. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Frankly, as I said earlier, I'm very, very simple-minded. I really, really am. I don't know how I did on that, but hopefully. Why, thank you so much. But I don't know, are there any questions? Yeah. Sure, I'll take questions. I'll take questions. Why wouldn't I take questions? I don't necessarily give answers, but I do take questions. Sure, I'll listen. Why not? Yes, Gilbert.
Well, how can you express the notion that people basically are under this belief that what I don't know won't hurt me?
Oh, wow. You know, that is the basis of so much that acts as a block to effective communication. What I don't know, you know, because basically what you're saying is there are so many people that say ignorance is bliss, right? If I had the answer to that, maybe I'd be a rich man. Sometimes it takes that loud, it takes John the Baptist, it takes the Bob, it takes Baha'u'llah, it takes every messenger who's willing to keep yelling until you can get past the noise of ignorance that people are so comfortable with. And I'll admit that is one of the most difficult obstacles to overcome towards communication. What I don't know won't hurt me. That is insulated listening. I just want to protect myself. I'm comfortable. And how do you get past that? Sometimes gentle nudging. I was actually reading, quite recently actually, about how to finally get someone to open up to communication. And they actually talk about this in the writings. It really comes down to having a lot of wisdom as to when to share a message. I believe I was reading that, and I know I am really ruining this, but basically, for me, it's very difficult if someone expresses the least little bit of interest in hearing about my beliefs as a Baha'i. Oh my goodness, I just want to say, here it all is. But it takes wisdom, according to what I was reading, you have to pick the right time, the right place, and face the fact that as a listener, this is a child. And so you might want to give them a child's portion of information because they are comfortable with their ignorance. And so you may have to slowly nudge them out of that, you know, what I don't know won't hurt me. I hope I'm not just talking around in circles here, but it really does take some gentle, you'd like to just slap them upside the head, let's face it. But what do you win then? What do you gain? So a lot of times it's just that constant persistence. Yeah.
Second question I have is that obviously outcome-based reality or evidence-based reality, how could you prevent people from misinterpreting to their benefit the actual reality?
I hope I understand the question. Misinterpreting to their benefit, right, the reality. So you've shared it with them and then they misinterpret it for the purpose of maintaining whatever they previously believed?
Well, obviously outcome. You're looking at this behavior of society yields this basically malady that exists. So the outcome is pretty clear and evident, and the cause is pretty clear and evident. So the question really goes back of how could you relate this evidence base to the actual behavior and correction or how to correct the outcome, and not saying that this is the natural state of reality.
Well, I think one thing that we always have to accept, number one, is as a listener, we have free choice. And some people just don't want to hear the truth. And that's unfortunate, but I think we've all been there where the truth hurts, and I'm having much more fun not knowing it. Or once we hear the truth, it's more fun if I tweak it a little bit here and there so it's something that's more digestible to me. But having said that, there are so many different places in the Baha'i writings and even in the Bible and other holy books where it just says, hey, put it out there. Those that will take it, give it to them. Those that will not, leave them to themselves. That sounds so cold-hearted. We would love to save everybody, and please don't misinterpret what I mean when I say save, but we would love to have everyone understand the message. And we're told by Abdu'l-Baha that everyone is given a different measure for understanding. We're supposed to help those who have less of a measure. But somewhere, everyone has some level of cognitive ability to understand something. We give them as much as they can understand, and then the choice is theirs. As to how to change that, I don't know. I mean, I keep thinking about where when Jesus sent the disciples off to, do their work, and when the Hawala and the Bab were sharing with their followers. And in each case, it comes down to share the word of God, and accept the fact that some people, unfortunately, choose their own ignorance. And beyond that, I don't know. Lisa, your hand was up.
What you said about that you were disarmed when the person genuinely listened to you, and I'm just commenting on that because I spent years working in customer service, and there may not have been a solution to a problem, but just to know that someone felt that they were heard and validated, even if there was no solution, that somebody was genuinely listening to them, and that just made everything okay.
Yeah,
I mean,
we all want to be heard. We certainly do, and it feels good when we know we're really heard. But again, as the listener, that really is hard work. First of all, it's hard to get to that position of I'm really going to listen to you. I've worked customer service before, and I know I was not the best customer service person. I got to the point where I could pseudo-listen. I just wanted to go ahead, get through this transaction and get you out of the way. But it does work wonders so much better when you truly listen, when someone can walk away feeling that they were really heard. And I think that's one of those things. When you're so full of a message that you want to share, it's very difficult to know you've got this message and not just gush forth with it, but actually just wait, introduce the topic, introduce the issue or whatever. And if someone has misgivings, allow them to express those misgivings. And then you can move past that. Yeah. Kristen. Oh.
I just wanted to ask this question. How can God listen to us, and how can we be answered if he doesn't listen to us?
Oh, that's such a great question.
And also the second question is, how can we help other people to listen to God?
Ooh, I think you got the wrong guy. As far as how God listens to us, that's the great thing. He just does. As to how, I'm not even going to pretend to know. But it's good to know that he does. And I think one of the hardest things for many of us is to actually believe that, yeah, he really listens and responds. He might not respond the way you want, but he does respond. Okay. And what was the second question? I'm sorry.
My second question is, how can we help other people listen to God?
I would say one of the best ways that we can help others listen to God is, number one, be good examples of people who listen to God. We must share ourselves present ourselves as an example. And that's in my own opinion, maybe I should stop short of saying that's the best way to teach, but no good teaching can be done without presenting yourself as an example of someone who listens to God, because that's why we're supposed to be doing what we do, no matter what our faith may be. We are supposed to be examples. Baha'u'llah pointed out that we do so much damage to the cause when we when we call ourselves Baha'is and don't present ourselves as examples of what a Baha'i should be. And that's not to say that we're perfect. We are not, but we should always be striving to be that good example. But as to, for others, try to be the good example. Susan and then Gilbert.
I just wanted to know if you happened to read the book, Responding 101 Questions.
I've read some of it, yes. It's an amazing book.
Yeah, and your friend who's the atheist?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I was really impressed by the way it spoke about the proving God's existence and just the whole random probability and all that. It was very scientific.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost impossible to refute that.
I'm going to have to share that with her because, as I said, I know that there are people that can prove God's existence. I just have not been one of them. I thought I saw another hand, Jaleh, and then Gilbert, and then Farah. Jaleh, did you have your hand up? Okay. Well, Jaleh, back here. Okay, just. Mm-hmm.
It was very nice talk you had, and
Well, thank you.
I understood that how much it is important to detach from all
Thank you. One of those words I meant to say and didn't.
thoughts and opinions and be open
Yes.
to others. At the same time, there are moments that we need to be attached to our goal inside and not give up. So it's a very, very difficult
Yes, it
to make
is.
this balance.
Yes, it is.
I would like, I think it's a good moment to listen to other opinions and other thoughts about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it takes a lot of wisdom to know, you're right, when to remain attached and when to detach.
There are moments that we need to
Yeah, you are correct in that. Gilbert.
How can we break the cycle of self-deception? Most of us basically are addicted to our own ideas. The question is, how do you break this cycle in terms of getting out and trying to improve your ability to examine basically yourself?
How can we break the cycle? I don't know. As one who is often involved in quite a bit of self-deception, it's kind of hard to come up with an answer to that. But as far as the cycle of it, I think one of those things that it takes, which is actually, again, just promoted in the Baha'i writings, is education. It's education, education, education. And of course, the question is, how do you get people who aren't interested in being spiritually educated to want to be educated? I think, again, it takes that persistence. It takes that's something where we just can keep showing it to them and showing it to them. I look at, it almost seems sacrilegious to compare teaching of any faith to sales. But I think the techniques are the same. They're persuasion. And a lot of times, how does a sales company, a corporation, get a product that no one's ever heard of and create a program where suddenly people want it? They somehow succeed in showing people there is this need that you have. And you might not have even known the need was there. Maybe you accepted your need, your problem, as just a part of life. It's life. But there is a way to satisfy that need. There is a way to solve the problem. Maybe you weren't even aware that the problem exists, but now you know. There basically are three ways of approaching a problem. We can call them propositions, and that's fact, value, and policy. Sometimes you have to share the truth that people do not know, even though they think they know. Sometimes it's value, where you have to get them to see. They may know this exists, but you have to share with them the value of it, or get them to see the worthlessness of what they have placed value on. And sometimes you have to look at it from the point of view of policy. And policy is getting them to see that what they have been doing is ineffective. They might have even felt that it worked, but there is a better way. There's a better line of behavior. There's a better path. But again, that takes persistence, and that takes a realization on the individual that there is information out there that I need. But it first starts with creating a sense of need. It's what we might call a sense of psychological imbalance. What I thought was okay now is no longer okay. What I accepted before is no longer acceptable. I have to do something about it. But again, to me, that all starts with education. And admittedly, in our society, that's one of those things that is hard to get across, is a sense of a true spiritual education, not an education that is based on, for lack of a better word, superstition or tradition. I'm sorry, yes.
You know, Tony, I think it's really love and caring for people. I think the basic need that everyone has, whether they're rich, poor, black, white, whatever, is that need to be loved. And if you can persuade and you can try to be, logical, and those are all good. But if someone really feels your love and your care, they're willing to listen at some point. So
you just trumped everything I said, and you're 100% correct.
So it's really what Abdu'l-Baha did all the time.
Yes.
He sincerely loved and cared.
And I think that's what opens up people's ears and their hearts.
Exactly.
Yeah, and you can get to the other stuff after you've done that, but
Yeah.
you can do all of that, and if they don't feel like listening, you're wasting your time. But if you can love their ears open,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right. If they really feel that you care for them, eventually they'll listen.
That's an excellent point.
Next question.
Uh-oh.
This is possibly to address Gilbert's question. At least that's the way I handle things. No matter what I do or what I say, I assume I'm always 50% wrong.
Oh.
With that approach, it always gives me the ability to be open-minded and not have that baggage that you were describing earlier.
Yeah, and it sounds like you go ahead and accept the fact that you are not infallible. And again, at the risk of being an absolute hypocrite, as I said earlier, it's easy for me to stand up here and talk about it. It's very difficult to execute, and it does take practice. We could all be better listeners, real spiritual listeners, listening to other people's hearts. I got a feeling that I'm going to be in some trouble because of a lot of what I've said this evening. You mean you know all of this? I got to admit, I'm not the best listener. And one of the problems with being less than a good listener is you're in the middle of it and you don't know. It's like being in quicksand and you don't know you're in quicksand. You think this is the way things are supposed to be, and I'm going to keep hammering my point home until I finally get you to think as I do, instead of, as you pointed out, facing the fact that, yeah, maybe I'm wrong. There is a method for problem solving, for conflict management, that is really simple. It's called the pillow method. And bottom line is it assumes 5 positions. Usually when you start out any kind of for lack of a better word, I'll just say a conflict, there are 2 positions that exist. I'm right and you're wrong. Both people have that mindset, I'm right and you're wrong. But if you can both open-mindedly look at 5 positions, perhaps I'm right and you're wrong. Perhaps you're right and I'm wrong. Perhaps we're both right. Maybe we're both wrong. Maybe it's not that important. Maybe our differences are less important than the truth, and what we discover is less important than our hanging on to the baggage that we hang on to. Yeah. Thank you, folks.
I want to thank Tony with one of the quality that he has.
What might that be?
And, Baha'u'llah says this, that a person who bears the quality of humility, he is like a ship in the ocean of knowledge. So, I really want to thank him for that quality, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Camby's. I really enjoyed it.